You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Apple Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Victor, and joining me is that friend to all mankind, that good spirit, that good soul, William Gallagher.
You should probably write these down beforehand. It's that little hesitation as you try to find something now. Always scares me. But
do you not like them? Are you not happy? Are you displeased?
So far, happy, but it's
Have
always...
I disappointed you in some way, William?
No, you've just scared me. That's all. But, you know, you're not going to change. I can tell. So...
10 seconds ago, before we started recording, you were saying that you had been heads down on the Angela Ahrendts story. And I said, well, so what's the Angela Ahrendts story? And you said, well, it's been 5 years, and it's her decision. And I said to you, what on earth are you talking about, man? You buried the lead. So tell me the story here, from the beginning.
You mean the world does not know that Angela Ahrendts, Senior Vice President of Retail of Apple, is no longer Senior Vice President of Apple Retail. Officially, she's leaving in April, but she's already been replaced by Deirdre O'Brien, effective immediately. So...
Wait, back up. So there are a couple of things here that I need to ask you, because this is just taken me by surprise, as I'm sure it took you by surprise.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I think the fact is you don't get very many big moves at Apple. We had, like the head of Siri being pushed around recently, but you don't get Craig Federighi leaving. You don't get Angela Ahrendts leaving, I thought. But,
there's some occasional reshuffling, right? Some days Phil is in charge of the App Store, some days Eddie Q is in charge of the App Store, but Phil and Eddie are mainstays, right? They haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah. It's a solid team. It's been going for a long time with really good people in it. So a major move. It's quite eye-popping, but whoever it is.
So... I mean, retail has been one of those areas where we had Ron Johnson, who was good, and then we had, although Ron Johnson was working alongside Steve, and so the Steve and Ron Johnson combination was very strong and very good. And of course, Johnson had success at Target previous to coming to Apple, and he didn't quite follow that on as well at JCPenney, but never mind that. JCPenney was their own story, and of course, they're mired in their own closings of stores and stuff right now. Now,
indeed.
Then we had John Brown from Dixon's.
John Browett, wasn't it?
Yes, John Browett.
Right. I would know that name better than you.
After Ron Johnson, then we had John Browett, who was a first-class nonce.
Okay, that seems harsh. It certainly, should we say he was unsuccessful?
Is that more polite? Is that more acceptable in polite company to say?
It is also, I don't know the details of it. I was kind of against him when he started because he was head of Dixon's, which was a UK store very well known for poor customer service. So him being hired as head of retail, he kind of came preloaded with some baggage for me. And I don't know the details of what he did. I just know he didn't do it for very long. So really, I mean, he had 9 months in the job. So really, head of Apple Retail, it was the Ron and Steve show. Then there was this caretaker bit in the middle where Tim Cook took over from Browett for a while. And then there's been Angela Ahrendts. And of important jobs in Apple, head of all of the stores, including the online one, it's gigantic. So a move here is massive.
It is. Now Browett didn't last very long because it's very clear when you get to Apple if you're going to be effective or not, and if you align with what they intend to have happen or not. And of course, he came from Dixon's, and Dixon's has a history of epic proportions of poor customer service, especially post-sale customer service, which is what Apple prided themselves on.
Yes.
And both pre-sale and post-sale customer service. And, the retail stores were a place where you could go and have a genius help you through things, or where the steps of service weren't designed to push you to sell. They were designed to help you find the right solution for you that you could then consider about buying.
Yeah, I've told you this before. I was in an Apple store once looking for a particular cable, I think it was, to do a certain job, and the Apple genius said, no. Yes, you could buy this one, but it's very expensive, and for what you need, you can get it cheaper over there. He pointed through the store window at whatever electronic store was opposite. So they lost a sale that day, but of course I came back and bought a Mac from them. So in the end, that service wins out.
Right, and it's They have steps of service that they used to teach people in the stores, and I'm sure they still do, although they changed since I knew them. And they were things like, you need to approach the customer, you need to probe what their needs are, you need to listen, and then you need to sort of evaluate, has the solution that I presented been the solution that you were actually looking for? Does it sound like I heard your needs and presented the right thing? And if you do those kinds of things in store, it's way better than directing you to sell the thing that the store wants to sell. And that's what Apple always succeeded at, was selling the thing that you really needed to buy, that you really needed to solve your problem. And under Browett, they slashed post-sale customer service to the point where it was difficult to get any sort of generosity or any sort of yes, you're 2 days out of your AppleCare warranty, but we understand that failures happen, and that's so close like that, we'll just go ahead and replace it on a manager say-so kind of thing. And that still happens a little bit these days, but it's a lot more difficult. And that's John Browett's legacy, is making things harder for the consumer.
And that's a legacy that you're saying Angela Ahrendts didn't supersede.
Well, it never rose to her level of awareness that there was even a problem. Had Browett not been there historically and we'd gone straight to Angela Ahrendts, then I expect those policies would have probably continued and it would have been glorious. But it's never just brought to her attention that these things and changes have been made. Some people, when they come into
make that presumption. We don't know what she was told or what she looked for, but she didn't appear to act on them. Yes, I see your point.
So let's talk about things that she did act on for a moment. Obviously, there have been sweeping changes. We originally didn't have these sorts. We early on in the very beginning of the stores, there was the store theater and there were some educational days, but that went away for a while. The theater has disappeared from the stores during remodels and so forth. And now we have Today at Apple. We went from having very little in the way of education during the John Browett period to having a lot of education now. And not just education, but sort of gathering and cultural, informing each other.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense to
What
me.
other kinds of changes do you think we've seen in the stores that you would highlight?
Well, and I see, the thing I'm interested in is I think when he came from Dixon's, your man just wanted to make a big splash and be seen for it. Whereas when Ahrendts came from Burberry, she was more concerned with sort of longer term things. So her biggest moves, I think, we'll never see. They were all in-house, internal stuff. I think she's improved Apple's systems. And she's also then brought forward Today at Apple and overseen many more store launches and revamps and things. But I think she's more skeletal change. She's set them up very well for the future, is how it seems to me. So I think that's quite good, really. A little bit there, yes.
Yes. And there were some other changes here. I'm trying to think of them for a moment. It's just because there's so much going on, right? It's
I've got to say, I am very interested. I mean, I'm interested in Angela Ahrendts because she's a really interesting person, but I think her position at Apple is fascinating. So in a way, my interest is kind of immediately transferred to Deirdre O'Brien, who has this amazing history at Apple that actually very few people know anything about. She's been there 3 decades, but she isn't really referred to much in history. She's been part of Apple manufacturing. I think there's a piece Fortune magazine talks about how she was very good on demand predictions and things like this. But for somebody compared to Ahrendts, she has a very low profile, and I think that's terribly interesting. We'll see what will come of her.
I think what I would say is that 30 years is 1989. Now, 1999 was after Steve Jobs left and was working on Next, and before his return in 97, when they immediately had to work on both reinvigorating people, creating the culture that Apple would become again, and making the hard transition from System 7 to System 8 and the Motorola processors to PowerPC processors. Well, also, so the 68,000 processors to the PowerPC processors. There are a huge number of transitions that had to take place. And that was a time period where a lot of people sort of fell into the old Apple and went by the wayside and got dismissed or went somewhere else, and the new Apple that became successful. And it's amazing that she made that transition to the new Apple and made it so strongly that she's been here all this time. You know, it was one of those time periods when Johnny Ive was tempted to leave Apple even. So making it through that transition is a big deal. Now, I was going back to thinking about some of the changes at retail under that Ahrendts. So Angela improved the infrastructure of Apple Retail. There was before online and retail were separate, and now they're unified. You know, when you used to have a large number of things that were carried online that were not carried in retail, and that's still somewhat true, but they used to have separate buyers for them, for example.
All right, now I didn't realise that because I read an interview just a few days actually ago. She did an interview with Vogue Business about the future of retail, and one of the things she mentioned was that I thought she was talking about companies other than Apple. That there's this idea that you might have a store and then people go and buy online. You don't see that as a failure of the store. You see the two working together. It's still a sale to the company, but you're saying that's actually a direct part of her having brought these things together. That's
absolutely. So in, let's say, 2010, 2011, there were different people in buying roles at Apple. There were people that were buyers for online, and there were separately positions that were buyers for the in-store physical retail store.
Mind you, they're just selling Apple gear, aren't they? So buying
No, you're making a mistake when you think about that. They're selling all of the accessories from all of the third parties. So the Herschel bags, the STM bags for laptop bags, all of the Belkin accessories and adapters that are along the wall, all of the IoT devices now that are there that are HomeKit compatible, all of the third-party cases that were there for so many years. All of these things have to get selected by a retail buyer or by the online buyer, or in this case now a unified buyer, and get chosen to be brought into the store. Okay. And there was a large number of things that Apple doesn't make that are sold in Apple stores, both online and retail. And like I said, before those were separate, and now they're unified. Now, they used to work together, right? You'd go in for a meeting at Apple, and you'd go for a buyer's meeting, and you'd meet with two people, the retail and the online. But they wouldn't necessarily agree on what they were taking.
Okay, so I see, in retrospect, sure, it got that way through logical progression and things, but in retrospect, it does sound daft. So there you go. She came in and undafted Apple. I like it. That's a nice job to have.
Well, I mean, it's not exactly daft, right? It's, if you think about things, if you're focused on your online sales, you put one person in charge of it because it's big enough that it needs to have one person managing it. Or in that case, a couple of people, because there was always the assistants to the buyers as well. And, you know, they're looking at their numbers and projections on and forecasting on what they think will sell and what they think things will sell like. And, you know, if you're go ahead and unifying that, technically you're really just shuffling and turning the other buyer into sort of an assistant and having the one final say on it. But really, they were big enough that it made sense to have it divided. And it made sense that there were things that you would sell online in number that you may not sell in enough numbers to put in stores. What was also daft was that worldwide was different. So the way it would work is you would have not just your online buyer and your retail buyer for the US, for example. You'd also have them for the UK, and they'd be separate people, and for Australia, and they'd be separate people, and for the Far East, Japan and China and so forth, they'd be separate people. And, you know, you could technically go and get a meeting with the UK buyer and try and get into Apple UK. But really what they wanted to do was be aligned with what the US was doing. And so you really needed to go and get a meeting with the US. And if you could get into the US, then it meant you could go worldwide.
Forgive me, this is a side point, but just saying it exactly that way reminded me. I once interviewed somebody at Microsoft UK, and he acted like he ruled the world and had personally invented Excel. And for some reason, the fact that he was just in the UK end really tickled me about it. But there you go, another point. Speaking of split roles, though, what do you think about the fact that Deirdre O'Brien continues to be Apple's vice president of people and is now retail plus people, and I mean specifically plus, the plus symbol, not the and. Is that they couldn't find somebody to replace Ahrendts directly, or is it a logical extension of O'Brien's role?
Well, you know, if you were writing the marketing copy around this announcement, you might say something, or the PR copy around this announcement, you might say something like, the core of Apple has always been the people.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And especially in the customer-facing role where our retail stores are our direct connection with people. Our people in retail are so important and so critical. So it makes sense to have one person in charge of retail, in charge of Today at Apple, in charge of all of these ways that they relate and interact with people.
But as you're not writing the PR copy, what do you
By the
think
way,
it
I'm
really means?
available for hire if someone. But no, yeah, it's. I think that there are common things that people do that are what we call human resources, right? And human resources tends to be making sure that employees are up to snuff or performing well, that people are meeting their goals or targets, that people are meeting the company's goals and targets, that that in terms of having the right mix of people is a good thing, and also making sure that Apple has enough in terms of benefits and compensation to make it attractive enough to keep the good people there, and hiring and just minutia like seasonal hiring, right? Christmas sales coming up, make sure you have people on hand, kind of thing. And Apple has mastered those things for the most part. So the question is Deirdre O'Brien also head of people for all of corporate Apple, which seems like a big role to be taking on as well as retail.
I believe she is, yes.
Yeah,
which means, I don't doubt her in any way, and I'm looking forward to what she does. I'm just curious because stereotypically, HR people tend to be very different from sales-related people, just in the corporations I've worked with. So, you've got to be certain that she's incredibly well informed at Apple, and that they wouldn't use her if she wasn't right for sales. But it's an interesting mix, and just makes me even more interested in her.
Well, yeah, it is interesting. But the way that Apple does sales is not exactly the way everyone else does sales. There's a reason why there are no great Gateway 2000 retail stores anymore.
Right. Yes.
There's the one thing that Apple does have to worry about is their ability to hire and their ability to retain, and at the same time, what it means to maintain the corporate culture that they want to have. And that's part of what Apple University was for. But with every person that you add, especially in a key role, you are changing what the culture can be. And
sure.
it takes
so,
and it takes that kind of effort to make sure that things stay on the same track. But I would say that Ahrendts moved the ball in a lot of ways. We used to have these massive lineups, right? I remember, like I said last episode, waiting at 3 a.m. for an iPad in 2010. And now no one does that because pre-orders are mostly kind of functional.
Is it really bad of me to say I quite miss the queuing up? I only did it a couple of times to see what it was like, but it was fun.
Well, it was a
Great
different era
chats
for
online.
Apple too. Let's think back and say that in those days, in queuing up for iPhones, for example, 2007, Apple was profitable based off of the iPod, but there was still very much a kind of cult feeling. If you were into Apple stuff, you were a little unique. You were a little special at that point, and that it's not the same at all now. That the iPhone is so widespread, Apple's stuff is so widespread that there's no real need to have that camaraderie from lineups.
Well, so I'm still special, but in other ways. I see your point. Okay. And with the sheer increase in volumes that Apple's gone through over her period, then yes, that all seems inevitable. I could be misquoting the figures here, but I have a feeling I read her saying recently that when she was at Burberry, the London-based fashion retail that she was CEO of, there was something like 11,000 employees overseas, and then it's 70,000 at Apple in the stores and things. And actually, 70,000 seems a bit low. I think of it, but that massive difference in what you said about
you've been in an Apple
culture
retail
going.
store, right, and had trouble getting waited on, yeah?
Yes.
Yes,
Only
70,000.
Apple Birmingham. Fine at Apple Solihull, just to credit the two local ones near me.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
No, you
always took that
go
as more
in,
than
you
a
sort of
run-off
fight
customers.
for someone to be able to pay attention to you to get what you need. Of course, that's part of what makes the going and using the App Store app and just checking yourself out if you're not buying something that's $high or has a unique serial code on it. A good
I had a thing
experience.
recently where I cannot remember what it is I went in to buy, and I'd ordered it in the line I was picking up, and Ange and I walked in, and on the way in, my phone said, hello, you're here, go wait over at the iPad table. And we're standing there, and I'm just thinking, why are you making us wait at the iPad table, William? Have you just bought an iPad? And that caused an interesting discussion, given the expense of iPads compared to whatever it was I was picking up.
So that is using iBeacons.
Yes.
And beacons, and iBeacons specifically, are a thing that no one has really adopted outside of Apple. It was meant to be this brilliant idea that you could, as a retailer, put beacons around your store and direct people to new things going on in your store. And also, by the way, be able to track where people are moving around your store, which would help you optimize your store, perhaps. But they didn't really catch on very well.
They are doing well in the Apple
uses
stores.
them. Apple uses them to great success, right? Apple uses them so you enter the store, they can announce that you should open up the app. They can direct you to the iPad table, or like you say. I always thought a great application for them was the rental car agency, where
here's your car. Turn left. Okay.
Right. You walk off the airplane. You're totally knackered from being on the airplane for 10 hours, and you get to the rental car desk, and you have to wait in line for the rental car desk, and then you sign all the paperwork saying, yes, you're responsible. Yes, you'll pay for the extra insurance, whatever. And then they say, yeah, your car is in slot E27. Right, so you drag yourself back out of the rental car agency, you look down the parking lot trying to find row E, and then you have to try and find slot 27. All this, put beacons on every car, and just keep them in the car. Power them off the cigarette lighter adapter, the power socket, and use the phone to check out your car, have it direct you with beacons to your car in the lot. You don't even read a retail counter anymore, basically.
So
you could end all of that
Angela
waiting in line.
Is going to do next?
I don't know
what Apple. No, very curious now. She has just picked up a lot of stock. She sold off Apple shares, some number of them in October, I think, and so made several $1 million out of that. I don't think she's rushing to the unemployment office yet, but she could well just nip in, sort out car rental on her way home. Yeah, she could do it.
Yeah. I mean that. So she's got some cash, not enough to buy Necker Island, but she's got some cash. Basically, is what we're saying.
Yes. They're very curious to know if she ever comes back to Burberry, because the company hasn't done as well since she left. But, neither. I'm sure there are other companies that want her, so we'll have to see.
I mean, it's kind of rare that you'd come back, isn't it?
Steve Jobs may have done something like that.
Yeah, you're right. Are there other examples? It's hard to think of them. There are a few examples along the way, people who've been entrepreneurs and, founded a business and then sold the business and then bought it back and relaunched it, kind of thing. That happens from time to time. But it's hard to think of a worldwide fashion brand like Burberry bringing back a CEO. It just doesn't seem to happen as much to me.
To be fair, the only things I know about the fashion industry, I know from having watched what Ahrendts has done. Yeah. I think the similarities with technology are just riveting, but I don't know the history.
Oh no, I pay attention to New York Fashion Week and London Fashion Week every year because you learn so much. It's really enlightening, and it affects everything because if you look, so every year out of those two fashion shows, Pantone picks the colors of the fashion show and the colors of the year.
And that's where they came from.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And so Pantone lays those out. And then if you look, every other product that launches uses that color palette. And you go into over here a Walmart or a Target or anyone's retail, for example, and the color palette is exactly the one that Pantone has laid out. And that Pantone color palette comes from New York and London Fashion Week.
I should assume everybody knocked off New York and London Fashion Week frocks, but this is a more scientific route to it.
All of these things, it's all connected.
The interconnectedness.
It is. It really is. We should talk about some other news. Now, obviously, Angela's news is very striking and is going to be a huge impact on Apple. But the Deirdre O'Brien, that's kind of an interesting choice. I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out.
I'm interested in the fact that I don't know what Ahrendts is going to do between now and April, because the moment this change was announced, O'Brien's title was officially changed on the Apple website, even to be both. So presumably there's going to be a handover period between the two. But you have the impression that O'Brien probably knows everything already because she's so well rooted in the company. So when will we see the difference?
Maybe, but if you've laid out your plans and your roadmap for what you're going to accomplish in the coming year, and you've got your 1-year roadmap and you've got your longer term 5-year roadmap of where you think things go, then you want to lay that out and talk through and see, here's why we're doing these plans. Here's the plans we've made so far. Here's the actions that mean that in 5 years we're going to be able to deliver on the 5-year plan by doing the work in year 1. You need to talk through that and lay out here's all that everything is. It's not just a simple short transition. It's a longer term thing. And of course, deciding if those plans are the same, although you presume they would be.
But you started to say, so now let us back into this. What else is going on? Well, I did hear the word Qualcomm floating around, and I thought of you.
That's interesting because I wasn't even going to talk Qualcomm yet. You bring up Qualcomm. Go ahead and lay it out.
Well, I was actually waiting for you to be the expert on this because I know you've been following the story. But Apple has won a motion to narrow the damages that Qualcomm can possibly get from them.
Right.
Well, that sounds pretty handy, doesn't it? That sounds
a little bit
good.
I mean,
for Apple.
Yeah, maybe. So basically, a U.S. federal judge granted Apple this motion to limit the damages that Qualcomm can claim in the patent trial. Now, what this comes down to is that Qualcomm, one of the complaints against Qualcomm is that they force chip buyers to sign patent licenses at unfair rates. And there's also been a set of charges where they've been asking licensees to pay twice, basically. Apple manufactures something, and the manufacturer has to pay the license fee, and then Apple also has to pay the license fee because they're shipping the product, kind of thing. And so what this is a basically a ruling that says that they won't be able to claim damages from before the suit was filed in 2017. They can only claim damages from that point. They also can't claim damages on all of the patents that they were suing over. One of the patents was rejected as being part of this, which was a patent connected to graphics and power consumption. So this is generally the same batch of patents that Qualcomm brought before the ITC, hoping to win an import ban. Apple was found to have infringed on one patent. The commission recommended against the ban. So that we're still awaiting a final ruling on that. That should come in March. It's just sort of all coalescing, right? There are these different suits around the world, Germany, China, so forth, and also the U.S. There's the International Trade Commission is involved, as well as federal judges in terms of the patent licensing issue. And so we're just seeing these things begin to come together.
You mean it could be over one day? A legal case could end.
Hey, the Samsung UI case took years, but eventually ended.
I secretly wonder if we're going to hear news that they found a new way to appeal something. Either side, don't care. It just always seems. I don't believe legal cases ever settle. But
eventually they do. No, eventually they do, and you know why they do, right?
Everybody gets tired. Jarndyce and Jarndyce kind of.
I mean, lawyers get paid for the hours, right? They bill the hours, but at some point, judges don't want to see this forever. You don't want your career to be known as the judge who only oversaw this one case for her whole life, right?
Okay. Yes.
This stuff has to come to an end at some point, and the judges are the ones who tell you when it's over, right?
Okay.
They make the ruling.
Later judges
supersede.
So
there are appeals, but you eventually exhaust your appeals options.
Okay.
And then judges tell you it's over there as well.
Okay. Well, and you can see the end in sight with Qualcomm.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably a good thing. Then it means everybody can get on with making things, doesn't it? What's
Eventually,
Apple making now? What's Qualcomm making?
Qualcomm makes processors. They make graphics chips. They make chipsets for cellular modems. They are going to have some of the very first actual 5G, not AT&T 5GE nonsense chipsets, so that you can actually have gigabit service to your phone under ideal conditions. So Qualcomm is not some pretender here. They do actually make stuff.
Okay, and Apple's been known to turn a lathe every now and again as well. So
Apple has yet to make their own cellular modem. Now, as we've talked about in the past, Apple's hiring engineers that indicate they might, but they've
made practically everything else themselves already, so it doesn't seem unlikely that they'll go that way. Yeah.
They didn't start out that way, though, right? They originally were using processors that were not that bespoke.
They just started out with $1 billion and a song in their heart, a dream in their hands.
They were using cellular modems, and then when around iPhone 4 happened, they had to get Qualcomm's because Qualcomm's the only one that owns CDMA technology. They were using the Power VR graphics chip for a while, and then they went and made their own. It's because Apple controls the operating system. Apple can dictate what it runs on. And so they can start out with things that are off the shelf, and then as they grow and gain more knowledge and more hiring, and more capabilities, they can build their own chips. So eventually we may see them make their own cellular modem. But for the time being, they're relying on other parties. What's interesting about this case is that it looks as if it may require other parties to be able to produce the kinds of things that Qualcomm has had a lock on. So it opens that up. If Intel and MediaTek are also making competent modems that use Qualcomm's CDMA technology, do they need to go and make their own? And the answer is only if they're really dissatisfied with the performance of the competitor parts.
Okay. But right this moment, Apple isn't making them. Qualcomm's importing cores. The only thing actually being made this week, it seems to me, are 230 emoji.
Well, so here's emoji is interesting, right? Emoji is interesting in a way because people use it to communicate, and because there is a standards organization called Unicode that decides what goes into it officially. And
yes,
they decide what goes into it officially, and then people get to different organizations render them slightly differently. Microsoft's emoji are not exactly the same as as Google's or the same as Apple's. In fact, examples of that have been the emoji for the gun, the firearm. Originally they all used somewhat realistic looking symbols that looked like a firearm, and then Apple changed it to a science fiction ray gun like you'd find in 1950s sci-fi, and then eventually everyone else also changed it to that because Unicode doesn't specify what the icon actually has to absolutely look like. They specify what the icon is supposed to represent and where it is in the font table, where it is numerically as a code. So that when an Android user types ray gun, that you get a ray gun on Apple or on Microsoft, right? When you get a frowny face, you want that frowny face to appear on all the platforms as opposed to someone else interpreting it as a smiley face.
Just as when you type uppercase or lowercase a, you get the character 65 sent to your screen, and your screen does the rest. Yes,
right, across platform.
Particular number. Yeah.
So.
I'm interested in that side. There was, I think, a very interesting 99% Invisible documentary covering somebody's aim to get a new emoji in. But I never use emojis, so I'm not really...
you are old.
Thanks. Goodbye.
I mean, that's why you don't use them, is they have no appeal to you. You don't use them with anyone who also uses them, and you would rather type what you intend to say as opposed to put up a symbol to represent it.
Possibly being a writer might have a factor in this, but I see your point. Yes, I'm aging even as we speak. Yes,
and there are a number of people, some of them who tend to be youths, who will type with a symbol as shorthand rather than writing something out. And shockingly, they may not even punctuate.
And now they're going to get another 230 ways to express themselves. I suppose that's good.
There's a whole study of discourse in texting versus speech, or texting versus other forms of more formal writing. And, when I said that sometimes people don't punctuate, it's interesting because punctuation takes on different meaning in different contexts. When you use a period in a text message, people will say, "Why are you so angry?" And you're like, "What do you mean? I just put a period at the end of my sentence." Well, the finality of that implies anger.
I have never heard that before. And the number of text messages I've sent with full stops in would be all of them ever.
Right.
To everybody.
Right. But your audience is less and less composed of, let's say, 13-year-olds or 15-year-olds. The people that you're texting
So you're saying
with.
when I've offended somebody so much that they've never spoken to me again, it isn't because of what I told them to do, it's because I put a full point at the end.
It's both.
Okay. I thought I had, verve in my writing, but no, I've just got punctuation.
Yeah.
Okay. God
Crazy,
knows what
huh?
would happen if I used a semicolon on somebody.
First of all, no one knows what that does anyway, right?
Well, I think they can figure it out.
You and I know, but I mean, it's a lesser used piece of punctuation. Would you agree?
Yes, I was actually once told by BBC Worldwide that I should never use semicolons because people don't understand what they are. I asked how this person who told me this was getting paid because I didn't understand that either. But he carried on getting paid and I carried on using them, and the public survived somehow.
Yeah, semicolon. William, do you remember 1989? What were you
Vaguely.
doing in 1989?
I was looking ahead 30 years to the future of podcasting with you and wishing it would come sooner. What about you?
1989 was one of those formative years for me. 1989 was incredible.
Are you able to tell us what you did, or is it
Nope. Nope.
personal?
Sorry, I really can't. I'm afraid I can't even share that. But
Well, thanks for bringing it up then.
you're welcome. But 1989 was a year of we were sort of on the cusp of big changes, right? That was the year I think Tim Berners-Lee began work on what would become internet, would become the World Wide Web, rather. I feel like that was a year when desktop publishing really began to become something into its own. We actually had PowerBooks show up at the school that we were using to make the school newspaper with, along about 1990. We were on the cusp of something big. It was almost there. And when we're talking about software, the software changes since then have been huge too, right?
Yes, absolutely. They've been huge. Yes.
And there are days where I feel like the software really hasn't come very far at all. We're doing the same tasks we were doing back then, and the computers are incredibly more powerful, but the software takes up tremendous amounts of resources now. We were doing the same stuff back then just as well, for at least some of it. But
Okay.
you feel like the software you're using is kind of stuck in the past sometimes.
Where are you going with this?
I'm asking you, do you feel like your software is stuck in the past?
I don't want to be contrary here, but no, I think in some ways I am. I'm still typing. That's pretty much it, all I do. But I'm now doing it on machines that are a million times faster than they were in the 90s. So if anything, I'm wasting the new resources of software. But I know this isn't where you wanted me to go, so lead me down the path just a little bit further.
All right. So there are times when I use software and it feels old and crufty and feels like I'm trying to make something work that just hasn't gotten on with the future yet. And what I realize is that it's hard to choose software. It's hard to choose what application you're going to use. There are some things you use because everyone uses them and they're the standard and you just must, right? It's the reason why I try and not use Microsoft Office, but I'm occasionally forced into opening it because everyone does, right? But at the same time, if you're trying to find a replacement for things, or a tool to do just the thing you need to do, it can be hard to choose. So Capterra is the leading free online resource to help you find the very best software solutions for your business. They have over 700,000 reviews of products from real software users, and you can discover everything you need to make an informed decision. That's a big deal because it's hard to know. You start searching for software and you might find 2 or 3 applications and you're like, well, how do I know which one's the
In the
good
time
one?
that we have left, I want to talk about a couple of news items, a couple of things that I think
And you can
are
search more than
important to
700
discuss.
specific categories
And we
of
sort of
software.
talked about this last
So
week. We were talking
project
about
management,
responsible
email
disclosure.
marketing,
Now,
to even Yoga
this
Studio
is
management software.
a suggestion
No matter what kind of software your business
based
needs,
on one of
Capterra makes
our
it easy to discover the right solution fast.
fantastic readers.
Visit Capterra.com/AppleInsider for free today to find the right tools to make 2019 the year for your business. Capterra.com/AppleInsider. Capterra, that's CAPTERRA.com/AppleInsider.
So I was talking with one of our listeners, Abel Demos, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Abel's very smart, and Abel is concerned about information security, and specifically where we're talking about bugs that crop up, security failings, and responsible disclosure. So, for example, there was a bug, a security problem,
that was discovered in the macOS Keychain. Now, this was discovered by Linus Henze, which I also hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Now, Linus is a veteran security researcher, and he revealed the existence of this macOS Keychain exploit. But he said, and somewhat controversially, that he's not going to share the details with Apple because of Apple's bug bounty policies. Now, a bug bounty is where you report a bug, and in exchange for reporting a bug, they offer to pay you for the bug, because bugs have value. You know, if you don't sell the bug to the company or get some reward for giving it to the company, there are tons of nefarious people online who will happily buy the bug and then exploit it to the detriment of all of your users. So Apple has a bug bounty program, but Apple's always paid a little less than everyone else, and Apple has always had it very limited for what will qualify for it versus what won't. Now, there's a demo application that Henze made called KeySteal, and it's able to extract login and system passwords from the keychain without having any administrator privileges. And this is regardless of whether the system integrity protection or access control lists are configured. System integrity protection was introduced a couple of releases of macOS ago. And basically what it does is it prevents system files from being modified, and upon reboot restores them to a known good version. And this is through cryptographic signing and monitoring changes and things like that. It basically means that you can be mostly sure that your macOS system is as it should be, as it was shipped by Apple, and not modified by someone outside or nefarious. But Keychain is a big deal. Keychain traditionally has always been a part of macOS 10, and it stored your login information for your user account. It stored your administrator password. It stores network passwords. It stores all kinds of things. And with the addition of iCloud Keychain, Safari starts storing passwords in it as well. Now, this is not an iCloud Keychain bug. This is a macOS Keychain bug. So you can go ahead and extract passwords, but you have to have this application running on the Mac that you're trying to extract them from, which means that it's not necessarily a remote hack. But if you were a nefarious person and built this thing, then you could obviously convince someone, social engineer them, to install it on their Mac, and then have it send passwords back over the network. So there is a real problem here, but it doesn't affect your iOS devices or your iCloud keychain per se. Now, Henze's disagreement here stems from the fact that Apple's bug bounty program only covers iOS. It doesn't cover macOS. And it's that's a problem because it places macOS at a disadvantage. Now, you could say that's an oversight, but that's where things stand. Now, even within the iOS sphere, like I said, Apple's been criticized as being stingy. You know, they pay less than what third-party firms offer. And this isn't small money. This is things like $2 million for a remote, persistent, zero-click iOS jailbreak. And the most that Apple will pay is $200,000, which, you know, you can see why a researcher would say that's questionable. Now, researchers who are doing this are independents, and they tend to be working for themselves, and that means that they become dependent upon these bug bounties paying out. And so, you know, if you were just going to sustain yourself on that. Now, 200,000 is a nice number, but as I said before, that only applies to iOS bugs, and they have to be persistent, remote, and zero-click. Now, this keychain bug for macOS, you could say that it's persistent. You could say that it is, but it's not exactly zero-click in the demo app that he's written, although it certainly could be, if it were written to be like that. And it's not remote at this time, again, although it could be. So it's an interesting problem. I think that my hope is that Apple will revisit these policies, because it's a very difficult situation when you have an independent researcher who's demonstrated the bug, so you know that it's theoretical or that it's even practical in that limited context of the demo, and yet has not been convinced to disclose it. You know, last week we were talking about responsible disclosure and how the parent of the 14-year-old worked so hard with Apple to try and figure out how to disclose a bug. And it was as if Apple wasn't really hearing it or making it easy for them to do it. Here, this person knows how to do responsible disclosure, knows the avenues to report it, but has chosen not to because it's not attractive to them to do so based on the way Apple behaves. And, you know, there are people that think that this kind of thing should be done out of the goodness of their hearts. But if you are trying to, earn a living or make it practical to keep researching, then it seems that Apple should be willing to pay something for this kind of thing, especially since it affects one of their core products. And that is not the only security thing that I wanted to talk about today. In addition to that, separate, but in the same vein, right? There are popular iOS apps that use something called Glassbox SDK to record user screens without permission. Now, why would you want to record someone's user's screen on their iPhone? There are a lot of good reasons. If you've written an application and you want to see where people struggle with your interface, if you want to see what people are using most about your app, then this is a way of equipping your app so that it can go ahead and send back those screens and replay the session of people using it so that you can sort of understand what those interactions were like. From a user interface standpoint, it's actually really smart because it says that you're paying attention to what your users are doing most and what they're trying to accomplish most, and then you can go ahead and change your app to make those interactions easier. Now, this is according to an investigation conducted by TechCrunch. The analytics firm Glassbox and other companies like it allow customers to embed session replay technology into their respective applications. So far, so good. These tools capture screenshots and user interactions, including on-screen taps, and in some cases keyboard entry, which are then sent back to app developers or Glassbox servers for further examination. Now, this is not the same kind of thing. It's not as polished as the screen recording function that's built into iOS 12, but it effectively screenshots an app's user interface at key moments to determine whether it's functioning as designed. And because it can do that, you can sort of reconstruct the mobile application view in a visual format. And technically, Glassbox told TechCrunch that Glassbox SDK can interact with the native application that it's bundled into, and it can't break out the boundary of that app. So it can't leave that app and get information from some other app. So it's sandboxed and firewalled off in that way. When a keyboard appears over the native app, Glassbox doesn't have access to it, they said. But if they're screenshotting, then you sort of think they could. Now, Glassbox customers include people like Abercrombie & Fitch and Hollister, Hotels.com, Expedia, Air Canada, Singapore Airlines. Monitoring users is nothing new. Monitoring users to try and do this sort of interface research is nothing new. But the problem comes when mishandling of session replays leads to sensitive information being exposed. For example, if you were trying to use the Air Canada app, Air Canada's app sent session replay data containing exposed passport and credit card numbers, which could be a problem because some companies opt to send the app data directly to Glassbox's cloud and not to their own servers. And also, you're trusting with that information in terms of your session for purchasing of flights, but do you really want that data living on long after that flight's been purchased? And furthermore, if you tried to man-in-the-middle attack it, which is to say that you tried to intercept the traffic before it got to its destination, you'd find that most of the data that Glassbox was transmitting was obfuscated, although some screenshots contained unmasked email and postcodes. So Abercrombie & Fitch, Hollister, Singapore Airlines passed session replay directly onto Glassbox, while Hotels.com and Expedia sidelined their data and really only sent it to their own domains. Now, none of these apps' privacy policies make it clear that that's what Glassbox is doing, or that there's Glassbox technology inside these apps that's being used to record their screens. With companies that are not opting to include mention of user monitoring in Apple's mandated disclosures, and Glassbox itself lacking requirements on its own, people are pretty much unaware that their actions are being so observed. So this is something to take into account, right? iOS is fine. iOS is secure. But these apps are leaking information, and sometimes with good reason, and sometimes doing it ham-handedly. So it's not clear what's going to come out of this. It's not clear if Apple's going to make a longer review process or going to start searching for this within apps, or if people should monitor their own traffic with their network analysis and see where their stuff's being sent, which is a little bit unlikely because, who's actually going to do that in practice? I can set up Wireshark. I can set up things like that to try and monitor it. But on the whole, it's generally something that doesn't happen. The thing is that if we look back historically, right, the first so-called app store was Steve Jobs telling us that we didn't need native apps for iPhone, that we should just use the web, and that web apps were the future. And that wouldn't have necessarily prevented this because there are websites that completely spy on session data as well. But it would have been, well, maybe not that different than having these apps, except that it would have been something that stayed resident on your phone. It would have been something that wipes out from time to time, which is not bad. So that's another thing that you should be aware of, be concerned about a little bit. Now, Apple years ago in iOS 7 introduced support for a feature called Do Not Track. That feature has just been removed in the 12.1 version of Safari. And basically, DNT is a signal that is sent, or Do Not Track is a signal that is sent to websites, analytics firms, plugin makers, and ad networks. And it's a request to not track the user. And the problem with Do Not Track is that it was never actually complied with. That you could make that request, but there was no penalty if the organization at the other end failed to honor your request. Even though as many as like 20% of people using the internet just want to be left alone and really don't want to be tracked. The private by design search company, that's DuckDuckGo, they say that the voluntary nature of Do Not Track makes it not foolproof at all. It makes it about as foolproof as putting a sign on your front lawn that says, please don't look in my house while all of your blinds are open. But there are a huge chunk of people who use Do Not Track that are unaware that it's voluntary and have no idea that the request isn't being honored. People that do honor Do Not Track requests tend to be Medium, Pinterest, and Reddit. Google, Facebook, and Twitter surprisingly do not honor Do Not Track. And I say surprisingly a little bit ironically. You know, you'd expect that Google, whose business is based on indexing people's information, is built around tracking, right? Facebook wants to know everything they can possibly know. Facebook is going to not honor Do Not Track. Twitter does not honor Do Not Track. But Medium, Pinterest, and Reddit do, which kind of suggests that there are ways to form a business online that don't require tracking. Now, what should you do if you want to avoid being tracked as much, right? You should consider changing to DuckDuckGo as your browser. Or you could use the DuckDuckGo privacy browser. You could switch your search engine to DuckDuckGo in Safari on mobile or Safari on web. You could use a VPN service. And there are VPN services that are reputable. There are VPN services where you're tunneling to an endpoint at the VPN service. Or if you were really interested, you could set up a VPN to your home internet network and do that. Although that would not get you free from tracking, it would get you going through your home internet provider and being tracked there as opposed to being tracked through whatever mobile service you use when you're out in the world. You can turn on prevent cross-site tracking, and that's really it. Turning off third-party cookies, which will cause functions and services to stop working. Now, Apple explained in their note that they're going to abandon DNT, but they are working on trying to make it so that Safari includes other privacy measures. So they've introduced new controls to prevent VR and AR app sets on websites from tracking user behavior. They've got intelligent tracking prevention to try and prevent long-term tracking. And Safari users are going to be warned when visiting sites that don't have SSL enabled. It's also going to warn users when you try and visit sites that are flagged as phishing or malicious sites. And Safari will now log people into sites automatically when the password autofill function fills in the credentials on a site. So trying to do these things is Apple working to try and help you maintain privacy. Because what we found is that voluntary solutions like Do Not Track just don't work. That's all the time we have today. We'll meet you back next week right here on the Apple Insider Podcast. Well, and that also brings us to the conclusion of the show. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I and my good friend William write for AppleInsider.com. I'm Victor at Apple Insider. He's William at Apple Insider. And what's your Twitter, William? People should go and bug you on Twitter.
My Twitter is smiley face fridge magnet raygun at Twitter, or W Gallagher.
Oh my goodness!
Why did I pick fridge magnet?
I'm trying to think about. Right, and my Twitter is Whiskey Cheeseburger. No, I'm at VMarks on Twitter, and we like hearing from you. We're so happy you listened and joined us for this week. We'll be back next week.